Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond. You can find the show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. If you are new to the show, there are lots of ways to listen. You can find everything archived here at AFR and on my website. Of course, I am on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play, Player FM, Podbean, and many other podcatchers. There's always new ones that are picking up my feed. So, if you see a new one, if there's one that you listen to that I don't mention on the show, please let me know, and I'll link up to it on my, website, and I'll plug it here as well. Of course, I'm also on YouTube. You can always subscribe to me that way. And if you would like to support the work that I do, then you can go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond, and you can become a subscriber and a supporter for as little as $1 a month, which gives you access to the exclusive monthly bonus podcast. I am working on the bonus podcast. It will undoubtedly probably come out, on January 30th or possibly even the 31st. But that seems to be a tradition here at the show, is having it come out at the very end of the month. But rest assured, I am working on it. It will be related to some stuff that I'll probably be getting into in the second hour of the show. But here in the first hour, we are joined by good friend of the show and frequent guest, J.P. Sotille. Of course, the news vandal himself, as Chuck Ocelli always says. JP joins us today, hopefully to discuss the politics of the past couple of weeks and many other things. But JP, how are you? It's been a while since I've had you on the show.
I like that. Hopefully to discuss, because it could go off the rails at any moment, right?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I'm girding my loins for the next slog, this 2020 campaign, which is obviously well underway. Kamala Harris raising $1.5 million almost overnight after her announcement. I just saw Julian Castro's speech in New Hampshire last week. Fascinating to watch him do his Obama impersonation, not just the story that he's telling about his grandmother and his mother, and this is a land of opportunity for immigrants and all that. It's all a great story, great narrative, the Obama narrative, but also using his inflection and some of his hand gestures, which I thought was really interesting. And and there are many more to come. I mean, who knows? This thing could swell to like 20 candidates, I would assume.
Yeah, we were talking, before we went on the air, that my girlfriend and I this morning, were talking about the 2020 race, and, it seems like, everybody and their mother is probably going to run, against Trump. And I wanted to discuss some other stuff, particularly, Trump and the current political, environment, or whatever you want to call it, that's going on in Washington with the shutdown and whatnot. But let's focus a bit on the Democratic hopefuls that are going to be running in 2020. And I mean, this is obviously pure speculation. And we do have there's a little bit of time in between now, and 2020, and when people are really going to be running full steam. But JP, the news vandal, give us your early prediction. I mean, do you think anyone has a shot at beating Donald Trump?
Yes.
Okay, and what?
No, I think that's not just possible. I think at this stage it could even be likely. I think it's actually more likely that, well, I don't want to say likely. I think it's entirely possible. I think there's a very good chance that Donald Trump won't be running in 2020.
Really?
Yeah, well, because we could do a bunch of interesting deep politics stuff here too, or semi-deep. How about, middle of the pool kind of politics? I really think that if Mueller's got something in that report, there are two things. I mean, the Mueller report is actually the elephant in the room, to make a GOP joke. And if he's got nothing, then I think it does actually open up a pretty clear path for Trump to win, because he's going to spend 2 years tooting his horn about how the deep state was trying to undermine him because he wanted to end wars and all this other stuff that he wanted to do, right? And then that will really solidify his base and give him a pretty clear shot at re-election. If Mueller does have something, I think that the GOP establishment, particularly in the Senate, will drop him like a bad habit. They got their tax cut. They got everything they want, because sitting off in the wings, you have two candidates of note. One is John Kasich, who is evangelical friendly, who would carry Ohio obviously easily. I think would also have a very good shot at carrying Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. He's great with evangelicals because he's that good old fashioned love your neighbor form of Christian.
Yes.
That sells pretty well with non-evangelicals. And I think we're going to be in an environment that's going to in some ways echo the environment in 1976 when the country was just tired. They wanted the long national nightmare to be over of Nixon, and they wanted something folksy and quiet and sane and different, and not of the milieu that they've just come out of. And Jimmy Carter was that at that time. I think Kasich can do that right now. I think the Republicans have another great opportunity sitting on the bench. That would be Nikki Haley. Mm-hmm. And this scenario is one that really resonates with me. Nikki Haley left the administration on her own terms and on good terms at the same time. She's not one of the, she was not somebody who was on the island of misfit toys, she was actually doing her own thing at the UN. She left. She sold her home in South Carolina to stay in New York and write a book. Well,
right.
You know what that means, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you writing a book? Is it because you also kind of know in the back of your mind when you said that in that Oval Office setting with Trump that you would not be running against Donald Trump, that you believed that because you didn't think Donald Trump would be running? And wouldn't the Republicans love in 2020 to cleanse the political palette by running a woman of color who brought down the Confederate flag?
Oh, and who was UN ambassador, strong on Israel, strong on Iran, all that kind of stuff.
All that, and a huge favorite with the evangelicals, because it's all about the evangelicals for the Republicans. They cannot win without the evangelicals. That's the core of Donald Trump's power, is the evangelical base, which is why you have things like the transgender ban in the military. That's just red meat for evangelicals. That's what it's all about. So that's kind of a roundabout way of coming back to your original question. So if Mueller's got something, and he's got to have something at this point, he has to have something. And the question is, will it be enough to peel off 10, 12, 15 Republicans so that somebody could go into the Oval Office and say, you are not going to survive impeachment in the Senate. And by the way, if you want to keep Trump Tower, you should probably leave now. Because if you don't leave, they're probably going to try and take everything. So that would open the field up, and that would create an entirely different dynamic. I think even if that doesn't happen, if the Mueller's got something, but we don't see it all, and it starts to leak out over time, and they don't peel off enough Republicans, I still think he could be wounded. If Mueller's got nothing, then Trump is in good shape. But if there's something there, enough there, I still think that there's enough of enthusiasm on the Democratic side to give him a good challenge and potentially beat him, or maybe even likely beat him. I mean, look, everything is on the Mueller report. I mean, we're all waiting on it. I mean, the shutdown is waiting on the Mueller report, as far as I'm concerned. The Democrats are going to sit there and wait for what? The Mueller report. That's what we have to. That's the only thing that's outstanding, really, and that's the only thing that's going to resolve anything. in any direction, it seems to me.
No, I kind of keep jumping back and forth with this as well. I mean, I find that the field of Democrats is not weak. I mean, I think there's some strong players there, but I don't really see any of them as uniting a big enough front to really kind of take on Trump. But at the same time, I think that it's interesting to think that, it's not going to be a Democrat that defeats him, but it's going to be a Republican, like a Nikki Haley or a Kasich or something like that, he gets into a position. And I think that that's the only way that Mueller will affect him in any way. If that means he steps down, if he resigns, if he just decides not to run, what have you. Right. The only thing I can see that is if the scenario that you laid out there, JP, whereby it becomes apparent that if you don't step aside, you're going to lose the Trump organization, and or your kids are going to be liable. They're probably not going to go to jail, but they might spend the next 3 or 4 years in and out of courts. Right. They might get, they could be handed down some sort of a punishment where they can no longer, act as CEO or CFO or something like that in a Trump organization. I think that might be the only thing that would kind of because ultimately that's really all he cares about. Yes. And to an extent, I mean, that kind of makes sense because it's like, being president is, you're only guaranteed 8 years. That's it, Now his organization I would assume he would want to live on forever. So that is fascinating. I will say the one thing and that I kind of keep coming back to is how long is he willing to continue this, Sisyphean task of supporting the wall? Because at some point, I mean, what are we now? We're into 30 days, I think, or close to that. Yeah. I mean, it's the Democrats can't and they won't budge on this, because if they budge on this, there's like a million other things, spending wise and whatnot. There are all sorts of other deals that they can't, if they cave in on this, then they're gonna cave in on everything else. So they're not gonna budge. At some point, Trump has to negotiate.
And this points up to another interesting dynamic that's going on right now. And you talk about the lackluster field potentially for the Democrats. I would say right now, of the 8 people who are running, they all seem to be running for vice president. Right? I mean, a pretty good slate of vice presidential candidates. I mean, particularly Julian Castro. I could see him being Julian Castro being a great
Me too.
Vice presidential. I mean, it's just perfect, right? Because you're finally trying to get Hispanics to come out in force and all that. It'd be, but you have to have, it seems to me, a woman at the top of that ticket. It seems to me. Why do I say that? Because the Democratic Party, and I think this is another reason you make a great legislative point about not capitulating on the wall, because if you capitulate on the wall, then he can just hold anything hostage and say, well, if I don't get X, we'll shut down the government. If I don't get Y, we shut down the government. That's a very logical legislative point. I think there's another thing here. The Democratic Party is ginned up, and they are experiencing something that the Republican Party has experienced 4 times in my lifetime. The first one was the election of Reagan, which is the culmination of an internal uprising or revolt, the conservative revolt, the Goldwater revolt, and they came to power in 1980, and that was the Reagan Revolution. Then there was another one that happened, and that was the evangelical Christian conservative revolution that came out when Pat Robertson ran in 1988 and goes to Iowa, and I believe came in second, and that gives birth to the Christian Coalition under Ralph Reed. And you saw a huge sort of grassroots movement inside the Republican Party where Republicans saw Christian conservatives starting at the local level, taking over school boards and then going into state houses, and that bottom-up thing that changed the nature of the Republican Party. Then there was the Contract for America, which is in a way was a revolution, and that group of people that came in there. Kasich was kind of one of those guys, the budget cutters and the Grover Norquist folks who piggybacked on Gingrich. And then finally was the Tea Party, which gave us the Freedom Caucus, and each one of these four events created a new gravity center in the Republican Party and an adjustment where the establishment had to start to parcel out some of their wish list and give it over to the base or parts of the base to hold the party together, and created a dynamic inside the Republican Party where ideological purity remained a constant, vexing problem for candidates wanting to run for office, right? It's this whole thing about being primaried. I think finally, after, the only sort of Democratic revolution of note, and it's not really a revolution. It's not one that people in the Democratic Party actually would call a revolution. It's one I think many of them would bemoan as a great mistake, which is the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council, that Bill Clinton was head of, and then the coming of Clintonism and the reorientation of the Democratic Party away from the New Deal and FDR toward pro-business, neoliberal economics, international military power projection, and Wall Street. And I think what we've seen in this last election cycle, in some ways instigated by Donald Trump's election, in many ways instigated by Donald elections, but I think also instigated by a feeling of despair over the fact that they lost to Donald Trump because they rode that DLC centrist Democrat thing one too many times with Hillary Clinton, is you see an upsurge from the grassroots, which I think is traced back to Occupy Wall Street and the fallout of the 2008 crash, so that the biggest star right now in the Democratic Party is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, by far.
Mm-hmm.
By far. I mean, she's setting the agenda in more than anybody else is in the party. That to me, and there was actually I think a poll that showed like 60% of Democrats would vote for her. She's too young to run, which I think tells you something about what's happening with the future of the Democratic Party. I think the Democratic Party is still in a bit of transition and is going to be dealing with this insurgent core much in the same way that the Republicans have been dealing with their versions of the insurgent core over the last 40 years, but the last one and the most important one being the Tea Party, which can hold the entire Republican Party hostage. So with these, what they do is they bring purity tests to all of their political battles. And I think now on the Democratic side, you are going to see the purity test start to alter the political field. So Kirsten Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, who, when you dig into her record as a prosecuting attorney, not very good on things like putting people in jail who have exculpatory evidence that would get them out of jail, but they stay in jail. Wrongful convictions. There was like 600 cases were thrown out because of tainted evidence that her and her office tried to cover, basically essentially tried to cover up, not in a criminal way, but more in a cover their posterior kind of way. So those folks, I think, are going to struggle against the purity test. And so when I'm looking at candidates, I'm looking who can get past the purity test, because I think that's going to be a big issue for Democrats in 2020.
I think so too, and I mean that's what I find fascinating about this crop of people that have come up is that Kamala Harris in particular, she's just a cop. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing really else to her. She is just the most pro-police politician. I mean, she might as well not be, a member of Congress and just go be like an international or, a national cop figure. So, that's basically all she is. I mean,
isn't there a hashtag? Kamala
I think it is something like that. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I get it, like that on, just in a purely, political optics, like, oh wow, a woman, she's black, like that supposedly is, oh, that's so great, that's so wonderful. It's like that, like, I mean, they're still, I don't know. I mean, I feel like you said that the Democrats are still in this sort of transitional period, but I mean, when it comes to the presidential stuff, I mean, they still seem to be like 2 or 3 steps behind the Republicans when it comes to this. I mean, like Kamala Harris, because she's a woman and she's black, she should be president. I mean, that's pretty shallow. and just it's so political. To think that that's going to pass. I mean, not to mention, I mean, there's other issues with her as well, but, you know, cause it is like sort of like, what is Kamala Harris except for someone that doesn't like Trump, you know?
Right.
I don't see much else behind her, that you can point to. I mean, we're going to be talking, ad nauseum probably about Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, well, I knew that was
second hour.
With good old fluorescent gray. So I'm going to let.
But I mean,
that's interesting in
full
and of
of
itself.
problems.
Yeah, I mean, she's got all kinds of problems, and in a way, it's kind of like Kirsten Gillibrand, who has problems on being against amnesty. Remember, she was I believe it was the 20th district in New York, which is Albany, Schenectady, in that area up there, pretty conservative area, right? Socially conservative. She had an A rating from the NRA, so she's got all of these 180s she's done, and then she was in Iowa, and I was reading a couple of the local newspaper accounts, the Des Moines Register and a couple other papers on that. And there were people in the audience who were saying, well, I don't like the way that she dealt with Al Franken. So here's the irony. She went with the Me Too purity test on Al Franken, and now I think that purity test is going to come back to bite her on a couple of these other issues. So there are a couple of other outliers. I think there's one candidate who, if I'm the Democrats, I'm trying to draft, and that's Mitch Landrieu. Mitch Landrieu, who is mayor of New Orleans.
Right.
Is great.
James O'Keefe broke into his office, right?
Yes.
Back in the day.
And he is great on race. He is great on the future of cities. He is great on talking about economic changes, because I think, look, what Kasich talks about all the time, we have a changing economy. We have to adapt to a changing economy. This is a Republican who accepted Medicaid expansion in his state. So Mitch Landrieu does that. Also, he's from the South. Democrats do really well with white guys from the South. I mean, it's true, right? Because I think it, unfortunately, because of the continuing problem of race in the political system, it ameliorates some of the challenges that they have in the South to have a white guy from the South. But Landrieu is great. I think you got Hickenlooper he's got a funny name, but I think Hickenlooper could be a Carter kind of guy. And then there are a lot of people who are interested in Garcetti coming out of LA. And I think one of the interesting things about all three of these guys, one of the interesting about two of them, but I think all three of them share a similar thing, because in a way, Hickenlooper coming from Colorado, it's almost the same as being a mayor, because it's not a big state. It's not Texas, California, New York.
Right.
So he has a more locally focused, political, radar. I think because we're seeing the reurbanization of America, to double down on the coming urban future is probably not a bad thing, because again, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is too young to run for Congress, but she is basically setting the agenda for the Democratic Party, and that's because the future of the Democratic Party is not trying to get the baby boomers to come out one more time. Just come on, boomers.
Oh, yeah.
Do it one more time.
That's what we need, right?
Right. No, they need to cut bait on the boomers. And I mean, I'm an Xer. I'm like at the very beginning of the Xers. The Xers will come. Some of the Xers will come, but it's about Y, Z, and millennials. And I think that's where the future is for them. And I think that's where they should move their appeal, because if they were to have to go up against, let's just say Mueller's got just enough to mess up the environment. If you're going up against Nikki Haley, you better have your A game, because
right. No, that's even, I think that's a tougher campaign.
Yes.
In some ways than going against Trump.
Oh yes, absolutely. This is why I have this weird feeling. Can we do a little speculation here, Pierce? You mind?
Yeah, please.
I've had this thing. I've been wondering about this. I would like to get your take. I'm not trying to turn the tables on you. But what the hell is William Barr doing as the AG designate? How did that happen? Well, I mean, why did he write like a 30-page term paper and turn it in and say, can I get an A here? Because I look at William Barr as being a quintessential establishment figure, but also a Republican establishment figure, but also a Bush family loyalist.
Mm.
He's a Bush family.
I mean, he basically signed off on. I was shocked that this didn't. I mean, not shocked because like who really cares about Iran-Contra anymore? But I mean, all of those people that Bush pardoned, that was essentially Barr saying, yeah, that's fine. So there's nothing wrong. Like there's no legal problem. There's no political optics that you want to consider.
Right.
Just give them all a blanket pass to again and. This is Mr. Tough on Crime saying it's fine to, sell arms to Iran and deal coke, and ship coke into America. That's fine because it's, I don't know, for freedom or something. And yeah, I know that was like, wasn't even on the table. It was really like, well, what do you think about Russia? As if I really give a shit what William Barr thinks about Russia.
Right.
And like Mueller. I mean, yes, it's important, I suppose, but I mean, again, this guy's track record is such, I mean, to be like, to speculate or to kind of look at a big picture. I mean, I do think Barr is a figure that, I think will, maybe not like save Trump, I mean, like Trump can't pardon himself, right? But Barr might be there to provide enough legal cover for Trump to justify and get away with whatever, whatever his end game might be. Now maybe it won't be so bad and he won't really need Barr, but if it really, if his back is up against the wall, Barr is such that, I mean, he would allow the president to do virtually anything, declare martial law.
I have a counter narrative to that. What if Barr is there to manage the removal of Donald Trump?
He could be. I would think that
you don't shiv Jeb Bush on a national stage repeatedly and get a pass from the Bush family. The Bush family does not forgive and forget.
Now, according to some right-wing pundits, that this might actually be part of a larger plan to get all of the pedophiles, JP. Because
I don't know.
Bush and Trump, George
W.
No,
I have not been getting messages from Q. Not been getting messages from Q. But what I'm looking at is the future of the Republican Party and the Republican establishment. And if people think the Republican establishment has been ejected, they're wrong. Mitch McConnell is just the most brilliant legislative strategist that we've probably seen in our lifetime. The last one who had this kind of capability was LBJ. I mean, this guy knows what he's doing, and I know for a fact from sources that he is not fond of Donald Trump at all.
No, that's an interesting take, thinking, because on the face of it, Mitch McConnell appears to be supporting Donald Trump with this wall, nonsense with the wall, and it's all about the Democrats, blah blah blah. But yeah, maybe he is playing a longer game, pushing Trump further and further into this hole. Because I mean, again, it's just like at some point, even his most ardent supporters are going to say, you know what, sir, like we need to actually start the government again.
That's
like,
right.
if nobody can get their tax returns, forget it.
Or the FBI saying we cannot run counterterrorism operations.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So
some terrorist gets loose because, oh, well, damn, we just didn't have the resources.
See, this whole the deep state thing and Donald Trump was a gift to the deep state. Because if you think the deep state is what I think it is, which is Wall Street, big oil, and big defense, and it's that axis that was established particularly with the founding of the CIA is being an arm of this iron triangle under Allen Dulles. That's what I think of as the deep state. I'm a Peter Dale Scott guy when it comes to what the deep state is. And Donald Trump has been servicing the deep state for the first 2 years of his presidency. There's no doubt about it. I mean, particularly look at the oil business and the defense business in particular, but then look at also Wall Street, which got this perfectly timed $1 trillion+ windfall just at amazingly came just as quantitative easing was winding down. I mean, what is the luck of that? Just when the free money you're using to drive up the market is drying up, you get a huge infusion of free money?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why was Mnuchin there? Why was Gary Cohn there? But Mnuchin in particular, why was Mnuchin there? Because Wall Street needed that money to keep the stock market casino rolling. And they got it. You know, the market that we've seen under Trump has been buoyed by buyback. So I also know that people are useful until they're not useful. And when they're not useful anymore, people will cut bait in Washington, D.C. And I think that the GOP establishment would be happy to cut bait on this guy and cleanse everybody's palate and say, here's a woman of color who we want to be our standard bearer. But anyway, to get back to the Democrats, you know, we haven't talked about Beto. I have a feeling Beto is going to become a parody of himself before.
Oh, he already has.
Right. So there's that. And I think that there are a lot of people breathing a sigh of relief over that inside the Democratic Party. You know, there may be somebody that we haven't thought of yet. I mean, you know, you look at Biden. I think Biden missed his shot.
I don't know. I think that I feel like there are enough people. I think Biden will possibly run. I don't know for certain. But I think that that's the Hillary Clinton boomer vote, yes, but with a tinge of, oh, well, you know, Obama, and so therefore Biden must be great. You know what I mean? Like, I think he will appeal slightly to a slightly larger audience, and maybe, I don't know, like a Biden Kamala Harris ticket or a Biden Castro ticket.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
you know, that might work.
Yes, I can see that happen, but I could also see that not being successful, particularly up against Kasich or Nikki Haley. Now, all of my formulations here, I mean, I'm kind of doubling and quadrupling and quintupling down on this idea that Trump's not going to be the standard bearer. It could come back that I'm wrong, that Bill Barr is not there to help his buddy, his very, very good friend Bob Mueller, who, when Donald Trump heard that during the hearings, was apparently knocked back on his heels because he didn't know.
And JP, I'm sorry, just to jump in, because the William Barr thing, again, that the on the face of it was like, oh, here we go. Here is one of a consummate DC, you know, swamp creature. Remember when it was all about draining the swamp? I mean, that slogan is gone. This guy lives and breathes the swamp. And Trump is letting him into one of the most powerful cabinet positions in the country.
Yep.
Again, it's like he is either, you know, like, this nut job, I think his name is Dave Janda. He is either working with George W. Bush, which suddenly we're supposed to like George W. Bush now,
I know.
Because he's going to help rout out all these criminals. Or Trump really is a complete and utter moron and has he has no concept of the people he's surrounding himself with. Because let's take your example, JP. What if Barr is there to, you know, help the Bush family and by default, you know, the establishment that kind of runs this country, and pushes him out. I mean, if Trump can't see that, then he really has no business, playing the 4D chess that he's supposed to be so good at. But anyway,
I think that's entirely possible because
I know.
I think what Donald Trump is to me is, well, there are a couple of things. I think he's a rectal thermometer in the ass of American culture, but I think his genius, if he has one, is in call and response politics. That's where he does his best. That's where he is at his most comfortable, wherein it's him in front of a crowd, interacting with a crowd, and using call and response
lock her up
to generate his political ideas. But in terms of like a tactician or a strategist with sort of, you know, a policy guy who understands the ins and outs of things, I think, you know, his training under Roy Cohn and in the crucible of real estate in New York, I think made him less of a mafia don, but more of somebody that people could use for their own purposes And as long as he continued to get paid off and he got all of he got all the attention he wanted, he was useful to people. That's why I think, you look at all of the different narratives, was he a Russian agent? No, you know what he is? Mohammed bin Salman and the United Arab Emirates and Bibi Netanyahu and Putin through Semyon Mogilevich and Lev Leviev and the people who are Lev Leviev being connected to Kushner and to Bibi. They saw a guy who's like Sheldon Adelson. They looked at him and they said, we can use this guy. We can use this guy. Just let him go out front. We'll get our wish list. It's not like he's an active agent. It's almost like he is a living example of the licensing deals that he had to use when nobody would really give him money. He's a licensing deal, right? And so I think that's kind of goes to your point where he may actually not see some of this stuff around him. Because I look at Barr almost I could see him playing an Alexander Haig kind of role.
Yeah, right.
Getting to the point at which Mr. President, look at this. I've seen the report. I'm not going to release the whole report. I have to release some of it. I just have to do it. But I've looked at the whole report. This is what the findings are. I can tell you that your presidency is in peril, right? I mean, I could see that happening. And it's not like again, you look at what Mitch McConnell did in securing the Supreme Court. These guys in these back rooms of the GOP establishment are really smart. They are good at the long game. They've been playing the long game because the people at the core, the financial people at the core of the Republican establishment have endured the 4 different revolutionary insurgency movements that I mentioned at the beginning of this segment or this hour. They've survived them. They've had to curtail their wish list from time to time. They've had to make compromises. They've had to do things, but still they are there. They're still getting what they want. Wall Street and big oil and big defense are still 3 of the most powerful sectors in American political and economic life. And they've done it by being able to manage these insurgent movements that crop up in the Republican Party. This is something that the Democratic Party does not have a lot of history in managing and coping with. That's why I think this is such an interesting environment now, and why I keep coming back to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because I think they have their own insurgency to deal with, and I think how the decisions they make in 2020 and who they settle on as a standard bearer is going to have a big impact on whether or not they're going to be able to survive it or not. Because I think one more failed presidential election, the party itself is in deep trouble. Or maybe that's actually what they need, one more final cleansing, so that all of these young people who are coming up can bring democratic socialism to the fore of the Democratic Party, because that's the latent force that the Democrats at the top are trying to manage right now, is this hunger for democratic socialism, Medicare for all, new Green Deal, marginal tax rates at 70%.
Student loan forgiveness. I mean, this is the other thing. Could you just, let's just say even if you're Hickenlooper, if you're running on student loan forgiveness, forget about it. Oh, I would vote for Trump if he was going to forgive all my student loans. It's that big an issue. I saw, in today's edition of the Rundown, you had a few articles about this, not to get totally off topic, but about student loans, how that's basically, which makes sense, is that the housing market is doing so terribly because nobody can afford to get a mortgage.
That's right.
It's difficult to rent an apartment, here like in New York City, but in general, I can't imagine a mortgage. Or taking out another loan. It's insane.
All of this is why, if you had to pin me down, I would say the ostensible front runner has to be Bernie Sanders. Because he can pass the purity tests. He has a demonstrated ability to draw a crowd. He appeals to young people. And he has a campaign infrastructure that he can reestablish very easily. I think all of those work in his favor. And he, of course, immediately hitched his wagon to Alexandria Ocasio Cortez with their new Green Deal announcement. And it's an interesting time, Pierce, because I think a lot of the issues that Democrats were afraid to go near, raising taxes, socialized medicine, right? Medicare for all, and the environment. I think the environment is a sleeper issue in this coming campaign. Sleeper issue. I think this may be the first time when the environment can motivate. It's not going to motivate boomers. It might motivate Gen X a bit, but it could motivate millennials in a big way, because millennials are now moving out of the if young people would only vote, we would win category. And they're moving into the, oh, you mean they're actually heading towards 30 and they want to have a house and a kid?
Yeah, right. Or just not constantly struggle paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
Working two jobs, No, that's what, and I think that, for better or worse, I don't particularly like Bernie Sanders. I'm not wild about, Ocasio Cortez, although I will say, that for the moment, she seems realer than most other politicians in Washington. And I can foresee her, maybe going the longest before being co-opted by the machine. And it does seem like, either way though, it's sort of like, I think that if you want to, dream big, you need an Ocasio Cortez.
Yes.
To get where you eventually might want to go.
Yep.
So in that sense, like, hey, all for it. And I have to freely admit, her, charisma, her ability to, energize people is impressive.
Yep.
Especially like that, idiot on Twitter, who, went after her for that, the Breakfast Club video, and then, he used Twitter. That was just so amazing.
Yeah.
For just dude, grow a pair. There's
a lot of that happening over there I think on the Republican side, they're actually going in the other direction. They've had a lot of that kind of energy repeatedly over the last 40 years in each one of their 4 little insurgencies or revolutionary movements inside the party. They've had this sudden burst of energy, and those people have eventually either been co-opted by the machine or become recalcitrants like the Freedom Caucus. But she's leading. She's giving the Democrats an opportunity to think outside of the box they found themselves in. And I think that's an important thing for them. Whether they're able to harness it, of course, is going to be another issue, right? But if you look at what's happening on the Republican side, now you've got Jacob Wohl and you've got Charlie Kirk, right?
Yeah.
Loving it. You mentioned our old friend at Project Veritas. The guys on the right, and they're mostly guys except for Tomi Lahren, who is another one of these, right?
Independent Sowens.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I forgot.
They're genius. And
they're actually punking themselves in ways, and all of this stuff about owning the libs. It's actually, what would you call it? Co-opting the what would you say?
Co-opting the cucks,
or something like that.
Yeah.
So Ocasio Cortez is finally giving the Democrats an opportunity to dish out what they've been taking for a long time. And there's I've had this, I'll get a little bit, maybe it's not quite controversial. It's a little bit controversial, maybe just because of the language involved. But I think this is something goes all the way back to the Reagan Revolution in 1980. And that's when Reagan, one of the most important political things that Reagan did was take the term liberal and turn it into an epithet. And that turning liberal into an epithet was also associating the idea of being a liberal with being weak, with being
soft,
being the P word.
Yes.
And if you were a liberal, you're a, right. Another term would be a wussy without a W, right? So I don't think it's coincidental that the Republicans end this sort of ring cycle of cowering the liberals, which, by the way, also gave birth to Bill Clinton, because Bill Clinton rises out of the ashes in many ways of Dukakis, who was seen as too soft and liberal from Massachusetts. We can't have those anymore, so we're gonna take those Southern hawks like Sam Nunn and Al Gore, who used to be super hawkish, right? They used to be called blue dogs. Remember blue dogs?
Yeah, right.
And Bill Clinton was kind of the most palatable of this Southern conservative blue dog Democrat, and that was to try and expunge the memory of being pushed around as being wussy liberals. Well, it does not seem to me to be entirely coincidental that the Republicans had as their standard bearer in America elected somebody who wanted to grab women by the them by the liberal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think now you're seeing it finally flip, where if the Democrats own their own political heritage, now is actually the time to double and quadruple down on your own political identity and reestablish it, because we're, I think, in a sea change. It's all part of this feeling I have, ultimately, Pierce, that Donald Trump is not the beginning of something. He's the end of something. It's the death rattle at the end of something. And okay, he's been able to do a couple things around the edges of policy. He hasn't had that much of an amazing policy impact. Most of the impact has been through malicious indifference to issues.
Right.
So now there is, I think, a lot of his supporters, a lot of these, particularly these, young white men, I love the poorly educated. A lot of these young white men who support him, who feel that their way of life is
slipping away.
It is. I mean, you look at the numbers. Capital One ran a commercial at 8:35 on a Sunday morning during CBS Sunday Morning, probably one of the more conservative news magazines you'll ever find. Not conservative in its political bent, but conservative in terms of the stories they show. They don't do anything controversial there on a Sunday morning.
No.
It's designed for the AARP set in many ways, with Jane Paul hosting all things. And there's a commercial, and the second shot is of a black lesbian couple sharing a romantic meal and kissing over their ramen and their bowl of soup. And this is a Capital One commercial. Capital One does not run that commercial if they don't run the numbers and say, well, the demographics show that this is actually where we need to position ourselves as a brand.
Well, that's kind of like the Gillette, commercial that's caused such a controversy, and with, I'm going to buy Schick now. First off, just wait, Schick is going to do the same thing. But again, I don't, first off, for me, Gillette ran it because they want to sell you razors. They don't really care, if, you're abusive or whatnot. I mean, that's irrelevant to them. And it is amazing branding, taking this old slogan, and, updating it for the reality that we live in. I mean, that's just smart marketing. Yep. But all the same, I mean, it's like you said, Gillette's not going to do that unless, a huge PR company and marketing firm and all these other, bigwigs at Gillette were like, this makes more sense. Like, we can lose the alt-right. And we're still going to make money.
Still going to make money, right? Because they've got numbers. They don't do that without.
They're not an activist group.
And focus groups, and in a way, it's kind of taking the old marketplace of ideas, free market Milton Friedman thing, and say, well, look, you know what the market is saying? The market is saying that this is where the numbers are, and this is where the money is. And you're right. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because they've crunched the numbers. And, interestingly, Morning Consult did a poll on the impact of that ad. And despite all of the hoo-ha on Twitter about it, and all of it, I went, because I do the rundown in my collection, I go to all of them every morning. I go to American Thinker, I go to the Federalist, I go to Daily Caller, I go to all Conservative HQ. I do them all every morning, and there was a lot of anxiety being expressed there about it. But on the Morning Consult poll, it was a huge win for Gillette. They tripled their positive brand identity with people in the poll as a result of that, which just goes to show you that the environment is moving, the culture and the politics is moving. The question is will the Democrats embrace it or find a way to screw it up? Because it's moving in their direction. And I think it's also another reason why a Nikki Haley or John Kasich would be way more appealing to the people in the back rooms who are the big money donors in the Republican Party, and the people who interface with Mitch McConnell, who are strategizing, how are we not going to get our clocks cleaned in 2020, and not just losing the House, but the Senate map does not look as good for the Republicans in 2020 as it did in 2016. This upcoming map is one where they could actually lose the Senate. They don't want to lose the Senate. They do not. They have to have the Senate. I mean, Mitch McConnell got them the Supreme Court as sort of a backstop for any future attempts to try and curtail money in politics or radically shift environmental regulations. They've got that 5-vote safety net there, but they still don't want to lose the Senate, and they actually don't have to, because they could recover very quickly with a very good presidential candidate who expunges much of the bad taste that Donald Trump leaves in the electorate's mouth.
No, I think that's a really interesting picture that you're painting here, JP. And I guess I thought I was like, oh man, this is just going to be like, painful, but it might actually be kind of fun to see how this plays out. And especially too, if the Democrats, attempt to, and again, I'm not trying to endorse the Democrats or something like that, but the party is changing. I mean, you can look at even something like Jeremy Corbyn sucks. He's not really like a left or any, but listen, they're so terrified of him.
Yes.
That they're still going after him. And that's not because Jeremy Corbyn is going to, become PM and everything is going to change. They're afraid of whatever movement he can get together. What if a real leftist candidate emerges? What if a real coalition happens, especially in a place like the UK, which is not, it's not like other European countries where you have multiple parties, but you could conceivably have a coalition party, between, say, even like a Jeremy Corbyn type, labor leader and like the Green Party or something like that.
Well, or the SNP.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Oh man,
or the Lib Dems switch
again.
Lib Dems.
If you put the SNP, the Lib Dems, and you pulled off the few remainers left in actually, I think there's more than a few. I think that's the dirty little secret of the Tories. But I think that this is actually where where most of the Western democracies, as they're called, where they find themselves, right?
Yeah.
And this is, I think, like if you look at Trudeau in Canada, there was a lot of hope that he would be a return, right, to the traditions of leftist politics in Canada, and there's a lot of disappointment. In a way, he's kind of becoming a little bit of the Obama of that, of Canada.
Tony Blair.
Right. Well, I don't want to go Tony Blair.
I don't think
Tony Blair and Bill Clinton, they are their own thing.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. He is like an Obama.
He's like an Obama, because I look at Obama as this interesting test case, because I know I never voted for Obama. Full disclosure, I am not a Democrat. I've never been a member of the Democratic Party. I don't vote for Democrats. I'm nonpartisan. So this is, I'm not trying to endorse anybody, as you said. I'm not trying to endorse. But when I talk to people about Democrats who will transgress their hopes and dreams.
Well, we are at the end of the show. I want to thank JP Sotille for joining us here in the first hour. You can find all of JP's work at newsvandal.com. Please sign up for the news rundown as well. JP, thank you so much for joining us, and we will be continuing this conversation in the second hour with Robbie Martin. But thank you so much, JP.
Thanks for indulging me, Pierce.
Anytime.
Welcome to the world's meeting place. American.
Practically narcotic.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Quality, value, style, service, selection, convenience, economy, savings, performance, experience, hospitality, low rates, friendly service, name brands, easy terms, affordable prices, money-back guarantee, free installation. Free admission, free appraisal, free alterations, free delivery, free estimates, free home trial, and free parking. No cash, no problem, no kidding. No fuss, no muss, no risk, no obligation, no red tape, no down payment, no entry fee, no hidden charges, no purchase necessary. No one will call on you. No payments or interest till September. What? Limited time only, though, so act now, order today, send no money, offer good while supplies last, 2 to a customer, each item sold separately, batteries not included, mileage may vary, all sales are final, allow 6 weeks for delivery, some items not available, some assembly required, some restrictions may apply. So come on in. Come on in. Come on in. Dang it. So come on in for a free demonstration and a free consultation with our friendly professional staff. Our experienced and knowledgeable sales representatives will help you make a selection that's just right for you and just right for your budget. And say, don't forget to pick up your free gift, a classic, deluxe, custom, designer, luxury, prestige, high quality, premium, select, gourmet pocket pencil sharpener. Yours for the asking, no purchase necessary. It's our way of saying thank you. And if you act now, we'll include an extra added free complimentary bonus gift, a classic, deluxe, custom, designer, luxury, prestige, high quality, premium, select, gourmet, combination key ring, magnifying glass, and garden hose in a genuine imitation leather style carrying case with authentic vinyl trim. Yours for the asking, no purchase necessary. It's our way of saying thank you. Actually, it's our way of saying bend over just a little bit farther.
Yo, what's up? Check this out.
The voice of the revolution. American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
When the weapons of mass destruction turned out not to be true, I expected the American people to rise up. They didn't. Then, when the Abu Ghraib torture thing surfaced, and it was revealed that our government participated in rendition, a practice where we kidnap people and turn them over to regimes who specialize in torture, I was sure then the American people would be heard from. We stood mute. Then came the news that we jailed thousands of so-called terrorist suspects, locked them up without the right to a trial or even the right to confront their accusers. Certainly, we would never stand for that. We did. And now it's been discovered the executive branch has been conducting massive illegal domestic surveillance on its own citizens, you and me. And I at least consoled myself that finally, the American people will have had enough. Evidently, we haven't. In fact, if the people of this country have spoken the messages, we're okay with it all.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow, friendships to flourish, with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control is good. 5, roger, copy. 3, 2, 1, engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are joining us here in the second hour, we are going to be speaking with a good friend of the show and frequent guest, Robbie Martin. Robbie will be joining us in just a few minutes. Of course, Robbie, you can find all of Robbie's work by going to both MediaRoots.org and also averyheavyagenda.com. And quickly, while we wait for Robbie to join us for the second hour here, where we're going to be talking about Tulsi Gabbard, I just wanted to plug a few upcoming shows, and also I totally realized when just before I went live with JP that I had totally forgot to post last week's the show I did last week with Chuck Ocelli. I'm a regular every other Tuesday. I actually trade off with JP Sotille in the second hour on Tuesday nights with Chuck, and last week was my slot, and I totally forgot to post the episode. I will post it a little after I finish recording here and get some technical things done with the show. I will post it up right away, but it was a really great episode. Chuck and I got into some really fascinating geopolitical territory, and we actually ended up talking quite a bit about the Democratic Republic of Congo, this failed coup in Gabon, which is a neighboring country, the sort of what's going on in Central Africa, how people like Eric Prince have been playing a more assertive role in Central Africa, and through his I can't remember the name of his company, but he has this sort of financial company that operates sort of under the cover of being a financial company, but is really a mercenary group essentially that operates plundering in Central Africa and other places. So we talked about that. So I just wanted to plug that quickly and just remind everyone to check that out when I do post it up. It was a fun, very good conversation. And we talked about other stuff too, including Syria. Some of the sort of machinations that are going on geopolitically. So I know people. The listeners love to hear that, so please do check that out. And then I also just wanted to plug some upcoming shows that were that are in the works. I'm not sure exactly because I have to kind of figure out when we can record, but we are going to have a friend of the show, Matt Alford, will be joining me. I think this will probably be his first time on the regular show. But Matt Alford, of course, is the man behind The Writer with No Hands, talking, about the Gary DeVore case. Of course, he co-wrote National Security Cinema with their good friend Tom Secker, but Matt has a new book called Union Jackboot, which he co-wrote. I can't remember the co-writer's name off the top of my head, but we're going to have Matt on the show to discuss that. Really, it's a fascinating book. I'm just about halfway through it right now. But a lot in there about UK foreign policy and also, there's a great chapter on Brexit and a really interesting take, which very much aligns with a lot of the stuff that we talked about on the show. So please look forward to that. I'm also next week I will be having on a good friend of the show, Carrie, who's joined us several times before to discuss comic books and the CIA and the influence with all of that. But Ryan will be joining us to discuss a new comic book called Sabrina, not about the teenage witch. This is a sort of conspiracy-related comic written by Nick Gernasso, I believe is how you pronounce his name. I'm sure Ryan will correct me. But I've been wanting to do this for quite some time, and hopefully I'll finally pick up the graphic novel, I guess is what you would call it. I always call it a comic. But hopefully I'll pick that up tomorrow and finally, I'll have to read it soon because I'm definitely having Ryan on the show. But there's a lot in there, a lot about the sort of like conspiracy culture, and I believe like allusions to the alt-right. It was something, if people go back and check out some of Ryan's older blog posts. He's written quite a bit on this Sabrina comic. So if you go to I believe on fourcolorapocalypse.wordpress.com, Ryan had some articles up on that. But you can also, if you go to Trash Film Guru on Twitter, you can find a lot of Ryan's other sites and work on this comic Sabrina. And I'm also I'm excited to have on our good friend Pat McKenna, the legendary private investigator who, of course, worked on the OJ trial, but also Casey Anthony, many other high-profile cases. But he will be joining me and our good friend Brian Heiss for what I assume will probably be our final episode on O.J. Simpson. But there's some new stuff that Brian wants to get into, so I will be having Pat and Brian on probably, I believe, the first Tuesday in February to discuss that. So let us know. And Danny, I believe Robbie is ready to go. So if you can call him up on his home number, that would be great. And hopefully we'll get Robbie on the line. There seems to be like a continued problem Robbie is here.
Hey, I'm here.
Okay. I was gonna say, this is like the last time we had you on. It was like, or maybe it was actually problems with Abby's phone.
Yeah, we're trying to juggle all three of us. I remember that.
Yeah.
How's it going, Pierce?
Very good. It's good to talk to you, Robbie. I think we last spoke just before Christmas, I think.
Yeah, we did. Yep.
Well, excellent. How have you been?
Pretty good, man. I just got to see Glass, a sequel to one of my favorite movies, and I was pretty stoked about it. So
yeah, you were telling me about that the other night, and I would you were talking about some sort of 9/11 related stuff with Glass. So I would be interested to watch it. I would have to watch Unbreakable as well, and I suppose Split, right, which is sort of like not a sequel, but
it was a surprise sequel.
Right.
So it's a trilogy technically, but yeah. I mean, a lot of people bash M. Night Shyamalan, for, the critics have the knives out for him, but yeah, I mean, I thought the movie was great. It was a really satisfying conclusion, and it's also like kind of a meta commentary on just like how superhero movies have taken over everything, in this sort of modern era. So it's pretty cool.
No, speaking of like superhero movies taking over, I was like, just unpleasantly surprised to see that like Black Panther was nominated for like Best Picture and a bunch of other things for the Oscars. I mean, it's just
weird.
Yeah, right? I mean, although I should do it at some point, but I believe either the CIA was involved in advising Black Panther, or the producers behind Black Panther were were sort of that was their resume to work with the CIA later, because the CIA is it's one of the most favorable portraits of the Central Intelligence Agency in many years.
So bizarre.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if that's like, if, maybe, Langley was lobbying, to get a nomination, but certainly enough money was dumped into that movie that it had to be nominated. And unfortunately, I think that'll mean it'll win a bunch of awards. Probably not Best Picture. I would hope not. Also, it just wasn't that good.
Yeah. And, I think, I've talked to your buddy Tom Secker about, some of the Marvel movies that had, government involvement, which is weird because, one of my favorite Marvel movies was Captain America Winter Soldier, which is almost like a commentary on the Obama drone warfare targeted assassination era. It's kind of an anomaly from the rest of the Marvel movies in terms of its politics.
And that one's also like kind of like a what is it, like Day of the Condor sort of conspiracy thriller as well.
Of course. Yeah, which is a movie about it's kind of secret CIA hit squads where spoilers, it sort of like breaks down how the CIA morals, and it's like, well, we're not like good guys or bad guys, we just like do what we need to do, like kind of thing.
Yeah. Which is a theme that carries over in a lot of CIA assisted Hollywood films. Like, The Good Shepherd is a big one, where it's just sort of like, we're not good or bad, but we're sort of necessary.
Totally, yeah.
Ultimately, we're necessary no matter what.
Yeah, I think actually one of the only movies I can think of I saw recently where the CIA is just straight up bad is a weird John Carpenter one that he made later in his career called Memoirs of an Invisible Man with Chevy Chase, where it's basically the CIA
heard of that.
CIA is just like portrayed as like pure evil in it, which is kind of like refreshing,
Interesting.
Sam Neill plays
Chevy Chase. Is it like a comedy?
Kind of is, yeah, but it's like Carpenter, before Carpenter started doing like crappy movies like Vampires and Ghosts on Mars. Like, I think it's like one of his last great movies, in my opinion.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I kind of can't stand Chevy Chase, but I will try and, I do like John Carpenter, or at least his early stuff.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, people are probably like, what the hell is this guy's taste in movies about? He's raving about M. Night Shyamalan and Chevy Chase.
And Chevy Chase, yeah, all the big hitters. Well, I guess we should proceed to, what we wanted to talk about here. And, in the first hour, JP Sotille and I we discussed, basically the entire show was spent talking about the various Democrats that are going to be running in 2020. JP and I also speculated about, the possibility of another Republican running in place of Trump, whether he leaves or decides not to run or what happens, that kind of possibility.
Like Romney or something like that.
Yeah, JP kind of threw out the idea of maybe like a John, if Trump gets to a position where, it becomes untenable for him to run without having, the possibility of maybe losing the Trump organization because of whatever Mueller may or may not have, might Trump to decide not to run, and then in which case maybe you'd have a John Kasich or possibly Nikki Haley running. And we talked about quite a few of the Democratic hopefuls, but one person we sort of avoided because I wanted to just talk about it here in the second hour is Tulsi Gabbard, who is, I think for lack of a better definition, is kind of like the Democrats' Ron Paul right now. I know that really, the Democrats' Ron Paul was Dennis Kucinich, but with Kucinich gone, Tulsi Gabbard sort of seems to be kind of filling that particular void or that energy. And Gabbard is somebody that, when she was first elected, I was fascinated by her. Certainly this whole she would surf and she was in the military, but she was sort of questioned some of the foreign policy decisions of the U.S. I found that to be kind of interesting. But, the more she began her career and the more things I started to read about her, I began to kind of question whether this congressperson was really like the answer to all of our problems and our woes. And as someone who considers himself, part of the anti-war movement, the anti-imperialist movement, I was always super weary of every time Tulsi Gabbard was sort of lumped into that community. And I know that this is something, Robbie, that you've been really explicit about. I know you talked about this certainly on Twitter, and I know that you and Abby have talked about this on Media Roots as well. And I just wanted to I'll just sort of throw it to you right now, Robbie. Why should we not consider Tulsi Gabbard to actually be an anti-imperialist or an anti-war candidate? And then we'll kind of dissect it. But what's your just sort of your news bite, soundbite kind of explanation?
Well, you brought up Ron Paul earlier, who has, a lot of problems with him. He's very conservative. I'm a progressive on the left. He's very conservative in a lot of ways. But what's interesting about Tulsi is she is actually to the right of Ron and Rand Paul on many foreign policy issues. And if you take her whole total record, foreign policy voting record, and especially her rhetoric, she actually seems quite to the right of Ron Paul and Rand Paul on many of the important foreign policy issues of the day. which I haven't really seen anybody really breaking it down like that. And I find it interesting because a lot of people are trying to spin it as she's the most progressive on foreign policy running on the Democratic side, which might be technically true if you cherry pick the things that she said, because what is actually progressive about going on Fox News when Obama is still in office and attacking Obama for not using the phrase radical Islamic terrorism? So I'm going to do a little bit of cherry picking too, just as an exercise here, to show how if you actually take the things that she said, you can actually make it seem like she's quite right-wing on some of these foreign policy issues. Like, I don't even remember Rand Paul making an issue about that. Radical Islamic terrorism.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe.
No, go ahead, Robbie.
Maybe he did, but she actually went on Fox News specifically to attack Obama on this issue. And one of the main things we keep hearing, and I think this is where people are getting confused, is, and I've seen Glenn Greenwald and some other people on the left dishonestly sort of framing this as being like, the Assadist, it's like they hate her because they say she's an Assadist and she wants to pull out of Syria and not overthrow Assad. That may be true in a certain sense of why the neoliberal establishment hates her so much. So that might be true. And then also, I heard people like Greenwald say, well, why are we creating this double standard for her on this anti-gay rhetoric that she used to say when we don't do it to people like Hillary Clinton or Joy-Ann Reid, who claimed a time-traveling hacker went back into her blog to make her say homophobic things in the early 2000s. But again, that's a little bit dishonest just in and of itself, because the anti-gay rhetoric that her and her father, I forgot his name is Mike Gabbard, I think,
yes,
was basically pro-conversion therapy. So some of the anti-gay rhetoric that she adopted early on in her sort of politicking is like more extreme than even people like Hillary Clinton. So that needs to be just said for the record too. But what's dishonest about framing it that way is like Greenwald, a guy who was really hard on the Obama administration and the Bush administration for torturing and then not prosecuting torturers and the people who put the torture policy in place, is like ignoring her, Gabbard's stance on torture, which as late as 2014, she was still conflicted about torture. That's only 4 years ago. That's like at the very end of the Obama presidency, you have Gabbard still conflicted about torture, and the reason she's conflicted, her answer sounds virtually identical to Sam Harris, with a little bit of Dick Cheney sprinkled in there. She gives a ticking time bomb scenario and says, if I was president, I would do everything in my power to stop an impending attack, and that's why I'm conflicted about torture. And she's not even asked about enhanced interrogation. The host says the word torture, like straight up. Right. And then, again, she tries to give her an out by saying, well, but they say that, torture can't even get valuable information. And then Tulsi's like, well, some say that it can, and actually some say that it can. It's like, wait, she was trying to give you an out, and you couldn't even answer that. It was just unbelievable. So for me, I didn't actually see that video until a week ago, and, I'm willing to get on board the stuff that she's saying in Syria is mostly right and important to add to the debate. But once I saw that video, I'm like, there's some serious issues with just her, not just her rhetoric that she's using in terms of foreign policy, but like her moral compass. Like, how could you say that? I just was blown away by the torture clip that I watched.
No, I saw you tweeting about that, this must have been last week, and I didn't even know she had ever said that. And I 100%, stand in line with you, Robbie. I don't really know how anyone in this day and age could be conflicted about it. You're either against it or you're for it.
Exactly.
There's no kind of like maybe I'd torture him just a little bit. I don't really get where that enters. And again, to not have that locked down, again, I think this is more, illustrative of her character, is like, she doesn't even have a yes or no answer. You know what I mean? Like that to me is even weaker. Own it. If you're about torture, then own it.
Exactly,
She won't even kind of go that far, which I think is probably politically savvy of her, so that, again, you can have right-wingers that see, let's not forget, David Duke loves Tulsi Gabbard, okay? Now, I don't know if there's a larger agenda there, and maybe that's, to make her look bad or whatnot, who knows who's paying David Duke to do whatever the hell he does. But it's interesting that, David Duke is supportive of her. And then you have, figures on the left, and I don't want to, name names, but, some very prominent left-wing radio hosts, podcasters, people I generally, listen to and admire or at least find, intelligent, that are completely supporting her. Because, again, this perception that, she's pro-Assad.
Yeah.
Which is a larger thing. We've talked about this before many times, Robbie. This compulsion to support Assad, to think that Assad is a good guy, while engaged in a vicious war. Now, is the war unjust against him? Absolutely. I would agree.
Yeah.
Is there a motive, to oust him based upon, external foreign actors, money, oil pipelines? Yes, of course, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that he's a good guy,
Yeah.
He's not part of the non-allied movement, which doesn't even really exist anymore. But I would even say he's not even a Maduro who's extremely, complicated and not doing so great. But I wouldn't even put him in that category,
Yeah.
So I don't understand quite how, all these so-called anti-war leftists are jumping on the Gabbard bandwagon. And I'll just add one more thing and then I'll throw it to you, Robbie. I think, something that we should really discuss more is, what, aside from Gabbard, going and meeting with Assad and speaking, on behalf of, getting troops out of Syria, can we point to anything else? And I maybe you know this better than me, Robbie, but can we point to anything else that would lead us to believe that Gabbard is anti-war, anti-interventionist? I don't know. The only other thing I can point to is the fact that she's basically an Islamophobe, aligned with very right-wing Hindus in India, including President Modi. And she, that seems to be coloring her whole thing. It's not that Assad is a good guy, I think, in her mind. I think it's that Assad is going after the bad Muslims. Assad as a secular leader is fine with her because this is a woman who openly supports a fascistic leader in India who wants to exterminate, or drive out most of the Muslims in India.
Yeah, and who's widely blamed for, inciting violent mobs that murdered many, many Muslims. I think something like 50 Muslims in one day.
Yeah, these pogroms, essentially.
Yeah, so, I think there's definitely something to that. And, that's, but then you can also encapsulate that in a larger framework where it's and this is something that neoliberals have tried to project, saying that Russian media is sort of to blame for getting us to adopt this sort of Putinistic viewpoint on Syria, that we need to get rid of the bad Muslims, the extremist Muslims, sort of almost adopting war on terror rhetoric to be anti-intervention in a weird way. And so I think there's definitely some truth to what you're saying about why, but I hesitate to fully go down that road because in my personal opinion, I think right-wing groups here in this country have managed to hijack aspects of sort of left anti-imperialism and use them to actually encapsulate a larger Islamophobia, sort of neocon light, kind of fake anti-intervention perspective for their own purposes. In the same way, and Trump, a lot of the things you're describing about her supposed anti-intervention, what you asked, what is her actual record on anti-intervention besides being, wanting to keep Assad in power, and then saying that we should, not fund these jihadi groups, she says. She actually started a bill called Stop Funding the Terrorists Act. And it's it's like, okay, I understand the point. I would have, if I was in that government body, I would have called it Stop the CIA from and the Pentagon from funding a proxy war in Syria Act. Because what it implies, and at first I was like, well, this is weird, because this is kind of what it implies. It implies that only funding jihadist groups is bad. That funding secular groups is actually okay. And in fact, in 2015, she voted to have this, I believe it was both the CIA and Pentagon still funding the Kurds to fight ISIS in Syria. So I think the left really needs to have a serious discussion, progressives need to, about why we've all passively accepted this idea that defeating ISIS or fighting ISIS with U.S. military resources is something that is okay under an anti-interventionist point of view. To me, that's personally not okay, because not only is it just weird that because, they're the most heinous group, we can all agree they're horrible, they're almost subhuman. I mean, I see leftists talking about ISIS as if they're less than human, which is an interesting thing. But not only that, and just how weird, the weird morality gray area of looking at a group of human beings like that, even though they act horribly, the additional thing of why are we trusting this general propaganda framework that we're fighting ISIS? Like, why are we trusting, like, even the dropping the Moab on those ISIS tunnels in Afghanistan? Mm-hmm. I don't even remember people being like, well, how do we even know these are ISIS? Like, what the hell's going on here? It was just like, that's something we're okay with, is fighting ISIS.
Right.
So I think that that's just an odd thing that Tulsi Gabbard, so the idea that Tulsi Gabbard is going to expand the debate about foreign policy, and it's important to have her there to add to that, to widen that debate. It may be technically true that she'll bring some interesting things to the table, but she'll also bring some toxic things to the table, like this acceptance of being in the Middle East endlessly to fight ISIS, or drone warfare, or even torture. What is her stance now on torture? I mean, and why is she saying things like, and this is an actual quote of hers, she said, I think this was like a year ago, she said, I am a dove on intervention, but I am a hawk on terrorism. That's a very bizarre thing, and it almost seems like the neocons have effectively, and I don't even know if this is their plan all along, but have effectively gotten one of the most anti-war, supposedly, candidates to start saying things that actually prop up their worldview. Because we know that the war on terrorism, in general, is a ploy to be able to do endless regime change operations, to have an excuse to always be able to, push our imperial will on all these other countries. It gives us more weight and to bully people around the world. That's the point of it. So it's not to actually kill terrorists or whatever the hell people say. It's to increase our power for regime. I mean, and our power includes regime change, like one aspect of how we flex our power. So it doesn't even make sense to me to say that, what she just said. So.
No, absolutely. And again, you can see her saying, we need to get the troops out of Syria. Okay, fine. But at the same time, how is Tulsi Gabbard, how is President-elect Tulsi Gabbard going to fight ISIS in Syria? Are she going to send some troops? Is she going to, like you said before, Robbie, it's okay to fund, like the YPG or Kurdish groups to fight on behalf of America? Against ISIS, drones. I mean, again, what's a President Gabbard going to do in East Africa right now, where suddenly Al-Shabaab is back, with a vengeance. They're carrying out spectacular bombings in Kenya. I mean, not to mention Somalia, but Kenya being a big one, in Nairobi. I mean, they're attacking major targets. And we already know that Trump is sending more and more troops all over Africa. I mean, I don't understand particularly all of these, imperialist pundits out there praising Gabbard when, how can you be opposed to war and anti-interventionism but want to fight terrorism? Like you said, I mean, somebody's going to have to die in order for this, and there's going to be some external force there, which I think you rightfully said, Robbie, this is like a neocon wet dream where they can sell a Tulsi Gabbard basically as the anti-war, progressive, but she will continue fighting the neocon war. Because, I mean, I don't see her saying anywhere, let's stop fighting. And I think in that sense, Ron Paul is to the left of Tulsi Gabbard.
Well,
I never thought I would say that.
No,
because at least he's like, let's just leave everything.
And he doesn't resort. Ron Paul, and actually this is something that differentiates him from his son. Ron Paul, from my recollection, and maybe this is different when he was putting out those racist newsletters, which they were very racist. I'm not going to deny that. I don't remember him resorting to Islamophobic rhetoric to make an anti-intervention argument. Rand Paul, after just having a private meeting with Donald Trump, because Trump is now this anti-interventionist. He says he's pulling all the troops out, even though the troops he's pulling out are technically the troops that he just put in. Rand Paul is tweeting things like, they've been killing each other since 600 AD. Like, we need to just get out of there and, like, build bridges here. It's like, what? Yeah. It's like, dude, your dad would have never said that. I mean, I don't know. And that kind of reminds me of the way Tulsi Gabbard, the flavor in which she talks about it. I don't think she said anything that bad about the Middle East. But you have to wonder why someone like Steve Bannon was courting her to be part of the transition team in the Trump administration. She had a meeting with Trump and several meetings with Bannon. Why does Bannon like her anti-interventionist rhetoric, quote unquote anti-interventionist rhetoric? What is it about that? And I'm not saying that, and I almost sound like I'm saying, well, because David Duke tweeted about her, that means she's a racist or a Nazi. No, I'm just saying, why would someone like Bannon meet with her but not other people? Like, why didn't Bannon meet with Rand Paul coming in? Why did Bannon meet with her specifically? And I really do think it's because she represents sort of that Tucker Carlson-ish, Trump-ish rhetoric on anti-intervention that ultimately serves the empire in certain ways. And when you're asking about why do certain left pundits promote her so much, well, I think that could be explained in a couple of ways. One way is that on some level, she is the first candidate to be repeating some of the rhetoric those left pundits put out about Syria. Like, she must read their stuff on some level.
Oh,
or watch their stuff.
Oh, she does because, like, on Joe Rogan, she's name-dropped a bunch of people.
Oh, of course. She's been shaped by those people, and then she promotes them. So, of course, on some level, they're going to want to be like, well, she's my favorite candidate, she's the best. But on the other hand, they're doing a disservice to their audience by not pointing out things like her statements on torture or admitting that she does say things that come off as Islamophobic. Just on that, just admitting that. And I've seen a couple of people, who I was unsure how they would land on this because they very heavily promoted her in the past. But like people like Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk actually spent a lot of time talking about how her torture stance is pretty goddamn bad and how we can't just like brush past it because of her other stuff. And I've seen some people mentioning that. But even like TYT, who's been critical of Tulsi Gabbard, didn't even mention that. So it's like people are missing certain things about her. There's a lot of cherry picking going on. And I just think people are just dancing around some of these really important problems that need to be discussed about her. And it just becomes this lesser of two evils argument. It's like, well, who is better than her in the race on foreign policy? And it's like, well, that's not the point. We need to talk about this general idea here. I think that it's not even really about her in this election. I think what's happening is a larger issue that needs to be seriously examined about how low the bar has gotten in terms of what is an anti-war, anti-imperialist position, like worldview. Because to me, the fact that she's being propped up as being anti-imperialist and anti-war is such a distortion that we need to examine why that is that bar has fallen so far. Is it because certain layers or people in the establishment have realized that anti-war in general as a concept will always kind of come back up in the debate and will always be popular. So, hey, we can't stop that. So maybe why don't we just Barr so much so that we can falsely distort the whole overall landscape and be like, this person is anti-war. Like Trump. Like Bill Kristol just tweeted a few days ago that Trump is now gone Ron Paul on foreign policy. I mean, and
yeah, what does that mean then? I mean,
it's just so false. Nancy Pelosi said that Trump is a dangerous isolationist a few weeks ago. That's so false. So you have to wonder, why are they saying that? Why? I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying they're all conspiring together to like destroy the anti-war movement for good, but it is weird. And to me, that's what needs to be examined, because if we're letting people like Tulsi Gabbard and Rand Paul and Tucker Carlson represent what being anti-war means, like, we're in a really bad way. Because even people like Keith Olbermann during the Iraq War were way more hardcore anti-war, and he's a milquetoast neoliberal for the most part. We really got to look at the whole total of how this has evolved, and people like Kucinich were way stronger on foreign policy than Tulsi Gabbard. And it's just like it's like, I understand the trap of wanting to support a candidate, wanting to defend somebody, but like, we need to just continue to hold up the principles and be like, no, these principles aren't like any less than they were before. Like, we need to uphold them and continue to speak out just in terms of what's an unacceptable thing to take for an anti-imperialist, anti-war candidate, or just what's an unacceptable view. Being conflicted about torture is an unacceptable view. Period.
Absolutely. Yeah. That should disqualify you from having, that moniker placed on you, as, and the same, it should be the case when you advocate, going after ISIS wherever it exists and going after Islamic terrorism. As if you can, like, go after that without committing the act of war.
Exactly.
It's just the two can't be separated. I understand that there's this, like you said, there's this desire to support her, and oh God, she's different, and this is the anti-war. It's just like, it's so pathetic if people that have been advocating for us to not be involved in every foreign war imaginable, to be supporting her because she said a few nice things about Assad, which, when you really parse it out, are really not all that progressive or left-leaning or anti-war.
No, and it's selective. It's all focused on Syria. Look at her rhetoric on North Korea before Trump started this, sort of symbolic peace process, which is really the South and North Korea are more responsible for whatever is happening progress-wise than he is. But look at her rhetoric on that. She was fear-mongering about nuclear North Korea for like a year, at least, when she first got in office, because she was Hawaiian and she wanted to, scare the Hawaiian people. It's just, so you gotta look at the totality of it. Trump could sit there now and act like he's anti-intervention and he was anti the Iraq War and anti, Obama bombing Libya and killing Gaddafi and all that stuff. But you look at the whole total of what he's said about those things, and actually, paints a different picture. He's cherry-picked his own record, too, to present himself as anti-war. So,
of course.
And also just the idea, going back to the idea of the war on terror, her saying that she is a dove on intervention, but a hawk on terror. Just going back into this idea of differentiating the war on terror from things like the Iraq War or things like bombing Libya. That's those were like, how are those not part of the war on terror? We lived through it. Oh, Afghanistan too.
We got rid of Al Qaeda. Then that entire war is about terrorism. Should we stay there until we've defeated everybody there? Until the Taliban submits? That's the other thing too. And I don't see Tulsi Gabbard talking about Afghanistan. Again, her stance on North Korea. I think it was earlier this morning, Mike Pence, gave some video, posted a video on Twitter basically encouraging right-wing elements within the military and business class in Venezuela to overthrow Maduro, and basically saying, we support you in your right-wing coup. I don't see Tulsi Gabbard. Now, granted, this just happened, but she's tweeted a few things since Mike Pence has tweeted this. I don't see her denouncing that. Again, maybe she will, but the fact that she's not out front being like, how is that? That's even worse to me, in many ways, that she won't, because that seems so obvious. That is just about regime change. You leave aside the war and all this stuff. This is just you're talking about, Mike Pence, basically giving the green light to right-wing elements in Venezuela to overthrow Maduro for America?
Well, it's insane. It's almost like saying, and they haven't even done this with Russia. I don't even think Obama or the Trump administration actually has the cojones to, but they haven't even said, we're not going to recognize Crimea as Russian. We're going to, make sure the maps, don't reflect it. But it's they're already saying, we're not going to recognize the elected president of Venezuela. We're going to, we're going to start referring to the opposition leader as the president. I think actually it was either Pompeo or somebody, maybe it was Pence who said that, but no, I was just discussing this with Abby. We were recording a new episode of Media Roots right before I got on the phone with you. And one of the things that we were talking about is if you really think about it, Venezuela is the ultimate litmus test to really see who is standing up for anti-regime change, anti-imperialism right now. And the fact that almost every sitting politician is just silent on it, it's really, that's the litmus test, because that will actually not gain you anything at all in the mainstream, in any sector. But being, and I'm not saying that we should overthrow Assad. I think it would be a horrible idea. I'm very against it. I've always been against it. But the idea that, it's risky for a politician to come out there and say we shouldn't overthrow Assad at this point is not necessarily true. It's really not that risky. Even though I do agree that Gabbard is getting largely attacked by neoliberal, the neoliberal consensus on this Assadist thing. That's a smear. Sure. But it is interesting that you really don't have anything to gain. You only have things to lose by coming out and being we need to not overthrow Maduro. He is an elected leader, whether you like it or not, of this country. Nobody's taking a stand on that. And to me, that's the ultimate litmus test, because you can't gain anything in your career at this point. But for some reason, there are sectors of the right, like Bannon, and other people like him, like some people on Breitbart, have been long anti-Syrian intervention. Tucker Carlson's against Syrian intervention. So you gain things by coming out on that. It's not a super risky position. But Venezuela, so I guess what I'm saying is pay attention to what these people are saying about Venezuela, because there is this desire, this hungriness to overthrow the regime there. If any country right now, it seems to be that's where a lot of the focus is. Even though there's not active bombing campaigns there by the U.S. military, that seems to be the specific focus of where they want to get rid of the regime.
Well, there was just I think it was on Monday, just yesterday, there was a sort of a failed coup, in Venezuela. A bunch of right-wing, low-ranking, military commanders or whatever. They went and they took over a police station, stole all the weapons, they stole some trucks. They just tried to overthrow him. Now, and again, like you said, you've got Pence, Pompeo, Trump, all of these people saying that, the true, president of Venezuela is this guy that lost terribly. It's not even close. The election was just such a joke. Now, partly that is most of the right-wingers didn't vote, but that's because they knew they were going to lose anyway. Ultimately, it is Maduro is the president. You kind of have to deal with that. But yeah, exactly. Like you said, Robbie, that should be more of a litmus test, because as you say, you're not gaining political points, by coming out and supporting Maduro. But like you said, with Assad you can. And I think that's also because there is this, undercurrent, with, Assad that, he's against the Muslim, the evil Muslims like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. He's against the Israelis, so a lot of the, right-wing, borderline, anti-Semite fascists within that movement love him for that reason, He's secular. So I think there is actually quite, there's some overlap. There is reason to kind of support him with all of that. Whereas, like you said, with Maduro, you want to turn America into Venezuela? You're evil. You should be locked up, throw away the key and tortured maybe, So yeah, I think that, but again, this is the thing. I actually find Tulsi Gabbard to be fairly simplistic and kind of, pretty base. Like, I don't know. Like, also, what are her other progressive credentials? I understand that, she's now very, she's seen very favorably by the, LGBTQ community. But, again, it wasn't that long ago that she wasn't. I understand that people can change. But again, keep in mind that, like you said, Robbie, this wasn't like, a Hillary Clinton opposition to gay marriage. Tulsi Gabbard is on record saying that, there was basically like a secret gay movement that was working against her. Like she
used the phrase homosexual extremists before.
Yeah. And I think, that and the sort of anti-Muslim / anti-terrorist stuff does all stem from her membership in, this, Hare Krishna cult, run by this guy Chris Butler, who I'll talk about in a future episode. But again, we should be looking into this kind of stuff, because what are her other progressive credentials, Robbie? Is she talking about, Medicare for everybody, or student loan forgiveness, or, any number of, like what's her stance on, like, the new Green Deal? Does she have anything to say about that?
I don't know what her stance is on something like the new Green Deal, but I do think, from what I've seen, she has voted, in a, progressive way on several domestic issues, important issues recently, and I can't name the exact ones. I wish I wrote some more notes down about her voting record, but in fairness, she has voted progressively, fairly consistently on some things, but her, in terms of the things that she chooses to talk about and get publicity for, like going on TV to talk about, she doesn't talk about those things. But I do think her voting record in that regard is better than, it may seem based on what the discussion we've had. But it is, I'm concerned about the things that she goes on TV to choose to talk about. Like, why did she go to Neil Cavuto and attack Obama about not using the phrase radical Islamic terrorism? That's really, to me, that's kind of incompatible with someone who's a true anti-interventionist. It seems like someone who has been influenced by neocon propaganda, to me.
Oh, yeah.
So,
and I think it's that new brand of kind of like, quote unquote liberal neocon, kind of like the Jamie Kirchick, like that sort of brand, like the RFERL, we're about human rights, but, we gotta kill all the bad guys. It's like that kind of neoconservatism. And I think Tulsi Gabbard is a great vessel for that.
Yeah, you could say, like, I think there's definitely a lot of truth to the idea that the neoconservatives have merged with sort of the liberal class in D.C., this neoliberal blob, and are sort of have attached to it like a host virus kind of a thing. But also the right-wing, populists, the Breitbarters, these people, who are really into Trump, they've also adopted neocon rhetoric, from like Fox News and the neocon, or just the right-wing talk radio circuit. So it's like the neocon agenda, in a way, has never been more widespread, like throughout all sectors of both sides of the political debate.
There is they are indistinguishable. There are no differences. That's the other thing too, is which is so disconcerting with the looming 2020 election, and obviously foreign policy is going to play. I think it'll probably play a bigger role in 2020 than it has in recent years, again, because of Russiagate and all that kind of stuff, and North Korea. But But, you know, it's like again, that Tulsi Gabbard is going to be propped up as somehow different when in reality, I mean, everyone has swallowed the war on terror pill. Nobody is denouncing that. Nobody is pushing back against that. That is now just par for the course. Which is pathetic when, you know, it wasn't that long ago. Like you said, like a Keith Olbermann or, you know, some of these other, morons on MSNBC or other places, even like Amy Goodman, who has strayed so far from that. I mean, you know, there was a time when it was okay for them to say, no, the Iraq war is stupid. We shouldn't be there at all. You know, it was like you could get away on mainstream TV with a quote unquote, you know, more of an anti-war stance than Tulsi Gabbard ever was. And this is like sort of like an aside, I'll throw it to you, Robbie, because we're fast approaching the end. But you know, this obsession with her on the left that she's a veteran is like, I don't understand that at all. You know, because you know, again, a lot of these left wing, you know, podcasters, radio hosts, people that are supporting her, you will hear them not malign veterans, but, you know, they will point like, oh, well, who cares if such and such a Republican was a veteran? You know, what does that really mean? But with Gabbard, it's like they're drinking that Kool-Aid too. That there's something honorable about serving, you know, in the empire. And again, my dad's a veteran. I don't think he should run for president. And I don't think that qualifies him to have, like, a better idea about, like, you know, Middle Eastern, you know, geopolitics because he served in the army. Who gives a shit? And I'll throw that to you, Robbie, because I find that interesting, too. It's like, again, this glorification of the army because she's a woman and she's Hindu and she's of color. But I'll throw that to you, Robbie, as we kind of close out today.
No, I mean, it doesn't make any difference to me. And I think if someone is a veteran, especially serving in one of these modern crazy wars as part of the war on terror, you really need to have your stuff locked down in terms of your stance on torture. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You can't say things, and just another example of how I feel like she throws Islamophobia around really casually. And especially for a veteran, it kind of really actually grossed me out. Because she was one of the Iraq occupation forces, you know, mm-hmm. one of the people, like, occupying this country. She said, and this is actually in her statement trying to explain why she is now sort of like pro-gay marriage and how she's not like anti-gay anymore. Mm-hmm. And everyone's like, oh, she shed her anti-gay views years ago. This is unfair to go after with. Well, this was, as far as I know, fairly recent. I think it might have been even from 2013, maybe. I'm not absolutely sure. But it was way more recent than her actual anti-gay statements from years and years ago. She said, paraphrasing, is that her belief back then was coming from this idea that you can't impose your will on people, you know, to like force them to accept your religious worldview, which I guess she was almost referring to like a non-religious worldview to like impose gay marriage on the public, because she didn't want to be like the Iraqis that she was like fighting against. And she didn't use the word theocratic, but it was sort of like she was implying that these like theocratic Iraqis. And what was so odd is like you would think, well, I'm gonna, you know, is she talking about ISIS? Is she talking about Saddam Hussein, who ran a secular country? Who is she talking about? She was just a soldier occupying this country, and she's using the Iraqis as a reason why she was hesitant to support gay marriage before. It's so freaking weird and just tone deaf and off color. I don't even know what to make about it.
No, and I think that's a great place to leave it. I want to thank Robbie Martin for joining us. You can find all of Robbie's work by going to MediaRoots.org and also VeryHeavyAgenda.com. And you can follow Robbie at Fluorescent Gray on Twitter. Thank you all so much, and I will be talking to you very soon.
No rules. No rules. No taboo topics. No taboo topics. No fear of doom. No fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
What is the big deal about swearing to God in the first place? Why does swearing to God mean you're going to tell the truth? Wouldn't affect me. If they said to me, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, I'd say, yeah. I'll tell you about as much truth as the people who wrote that Bible. How do you like that? Huh? Swearing to God is kid stuff. Swearing to God doesn't mean anything. Swearing on the Bible doesn't mean anything. You know why? Because Bible or no Bible, God or no God, if it suits their purposes, people are going to lie in court. The police do it all the time. All the time. Yes, they do. It's part of their job to protect, to serve, and to commit perjury whenever it supports the state's case. Swearing on the Bible is just one more way of controlling people and keeping them in line, and it's one more thing that holds us back as a species. Tell the truth. Don't be bullshitting people. There's enough bullshit as it is. In fact, there's just enough. Did you know that? There's just enough bullshit to hold things together in this country. Bullshit is the glue that binds us as a nation. Where would we be without our safe, familiar American bullshit? Land of the free, home of the brave, the American dream. All men are equal, justice is blind, the press is free, your vote counts. Business is honest, the good guys win, the police are on your side, God is watching you, your standard of living will never decline, and everything is going to be just fine. The official national bullshit story. I call it the American okey doke.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control the all out. Control is good. 5. Roger, 4. 3. 2. 1. Take guys.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio.